quick word about why we're here and why we did this. I had a big long speech written about software and software developers and things, but I just want to say we love software. Ian and I live and breathe software, and that's why we wanted to do this. We love to code, and this is Codemania. Okay? Yeah! So I'll introduce Phil to kick things off. Phil is Windows badass with GitHub, and he's going to tell us about coding for love, or loving code. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so the mic is on. Good. I just make sure I do that. So typically, when I give a talk, I have time before the talk begins to warm up the crowd, but unfortunately, I need to probably move through this pretty quickly, getting a late start. Oh, but wait, you got to watch this one. This one's great. Okay, well, anyways. And this one's even better. I don't know if you saw this one, but it's kind of windy. He's going to kick the ball. It's going to blow back, and it's going to score on himself. That's why I love this sport. And then, Conan O'Brien. And this is a couple of my coworkers at GitHub. We have these really nice hoodies, and it's called Gimme 5. Anyways, let me get back to it. Okay, so originally when Ben and Ian asked me to come speak, they said, oh, we want you to talk about community development on the Microsoft platform. And I looked at that title, and I thought, oh, that's so boring. So I thought of something else to talk about that fit more in the theme. But I will also touch upon some of these other things like community development on the Microsoft platform. But I wanted to speak about something that's closer to the theme of this thing. And so I fucking love to code. So that's the title of this talk. And how many of you love to code? You should have hands. Great, great. Now I know what you're thinking. Some of you might be thinking, well, that's a really strong word to use, Phil. Love. And I think it's fitting, though. Now, I plan on putting these slides online, and I know there are going to be some people who will take objection maybe to the other word I use. And so I want to take an aside and talk about research. So did I really need to swear? Well, no, but I don't need to eat ice cream. I don't need to play soccer, but I love these things. And when used sparingly, it turns out that it's surprisingly effective. You might not remember any other word I say tonight, but you will remember the title of my talk. And it doesn't actually hurt anyone. So if someone says, oh, well, you hurt these people by saying that word, well, it's not true. But anyways. But it turns out that many of you are here and taking a day off of work, and we appreciate that, to come here and speak. And you need to go back to your boss and say, well, I heard this talk by this guy named Phil, and you probably need a title you can tell your boss that it doesn't include the word fuck. So I have this secondary title, How to Double Your Productivity in One Easy Step. So I'll get to that point at the end, though. So this is me. My name's Phil Haack. I'm at Hacked on Twitter, and Haack.com is my blog. I want to tell you a little bit about me to give you a little background, a little bit about my background. So up until this past December, I worked at Microsoft. I had the implants put in and everything. And everyone who works at Microsoft loves to joke about being part of the Borg. But it turns out that actually it was kind of a nice thing. I got to work on really amazing products. If you're familiar with ASP.NET MVC, which was just recently announced that it went open source in the sense of accepting contributions, the entire stack. I worked on NuGet, which has been open source and accepting contributions from the very beginning, among other things. But there are certain things that I didn't quite see eye to eye with Microsoft. There's the things I love to do, which was working on this technology, and then there was all the extra stuff you have to deal with. And so I decided to take off the Borg implants, attach my robot arms, and hang out with my buddy Hubot here and join GitHub. And that's where I work today. So as Ben mentioned, my title was, my offer letter, my title was Windows Badass. But again, if you need to go back to your boss and you say, well, I heard this talk by this guy, my other title is also VP of Product Development. And the reason they gave me that title was because sometimes when you meet with people at Microsoft, they won't let you in the room unless you have a lofty title. So it doesn't actually mean anything unless you want to invite me to a meeting. But anyways. So we like to joke that Microsoft's the Borg, but it's not really the Borg. I don't know if you've ever seen this org chart by this guy, and you look at this and you look at Apple, and that to me looks like the Borg, right? A bunch of spokes and the central queen. So this is more representative of Microsoft. And I didn't realize how true this was until I actually worked at Microsoft. One example is when you look at the things that Scott Guthrie and his org are doing, they're making everything open and collaborative. You can contribute to the code. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's been a long time coming. But then you look at, there's sort of two Microsofts. There's the Guthrie Microsoft, and then there's the Sinofsky Microsoft. And I greatly admire Sinofsky. He knows how to ship software. Windows 7 was an amazing accomplishment. But at the same time, he's sort of taken Microsoft in this opposite direction where everything is closed. For example, the WinRT, they basically rewrote jQuery because they couldn't use jQuery, right? So, and that kind of saddens me. But anyways, enough about me, enough about Microsoft. I want to talk about love of coding and things that get in the way of that. So whether it's individually, at work, or industry-wide. So I'll touch upon all three of these points. So if there was one thing I could tell my younger self, if I could go back in time and I say, give myself one piece of advice, it would be stop chasing the money. And what I mean by that is that when you focus on trying to make more money, you often make very bad decisions about your career and what it is you want to do. Rather than focusing on doing some work that you love, you focus on working long hours to make more money. And it turns out that once you make a certain amount of money, it doesn't motivate you to make more than that amount. Now, this kind of blows a lot of people's mind because nobody wants to believe this. They're like, no, more money will make me more happy, right? More is better. But there's this talk by Dan Pink called Drive. He wrote a book called Drive, and it's the surprising truth of what really motivates us. And I'll have links to everything I talk about at the end. And there's a really great video by the RSA Animate guys where it goes into hundreds of years of research by economists who've known this for a very long time, that money doesn't actually motivate people to do a better job. Now, it does work when you're talking about rote assembly line type of thing. But when you're talking about a creative endeavor, and coding is one of the most creative endeavors possible, right? What other profession can you take raw thought and apply it and create something amazing that other people can use and get instant feedback? I mean, it's a very creative endeavor. And it turns out that money is not the thing that motivates creative types like us. What we're motivated by are these three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So autonomy is a really good one. It's the ability to not have to deal with 8 bosses asking you about your TPS cover sheet every day. Mastery is the ability to, and the freedom to actually get very good at your craft. Having the resources provided, giving the freedom to do so. And purpose is believing in the thing that you're building. No matter what it is, there are people who are on the opposite end using it, and when you can interact with your users and you're not sequestered away, hidden in the dark dungeon, then you sense a purpose in the work you do, no matter what type of software you write. And the other thing is the extra hours hurt more than they help. There's this recent blog post I read, article. Not everything's a blog post. Bring back the 40-hour work week. And he talks about 150 years of research that proves that long hours at work kills productivity and employees. It affects your health, and it turns out that once you hit around 40 hours in your week, everything you do afterward is crap and most likely bug-ridden and most likely going to cause more pain down the road. There's this really great computer science researcher, Robert Glass, and he talks about how in any software system, 80% of the time spent is in maintenance, and you have 20% of the time is actually writing new code. And he also talks about Steve McConnell talks about the cost of a bug introduced early and caught early versus a bug caught later. And it's 10 to 100 times the cost. So if you introduce a bug early, it's going to be 100 times the cost to find it and fix it if you let it go through the longer it stays in the system. And those types of mistakes happen when you're tired, when you're overworked, and when you've been working too many hours. So if you're working 50, 60 hours, it might be worth thinking about, can you make changes in your workplace for that? And I know it's hard. If you're a manager, it might be worth thinking you can get more out of your people by cutting out things that they don't need to do, like meetings, and allow them to spend more time coding, but not overdo it. Anyways, the key point here, the key point here is that this concept of heroes, which is very big in the software industry, the guy who goes in and works 80-hour a day for 7 days a week and ships the product on time. That sense is heroes are really only fooling themselves. They're not really accomplishing what they think they are. And I have so many stories about this that I'll tell some other time. I've been trying to write a blog post about this, about situations I've been in where we had this guy, oh, he's fast, but he was very fast at creating a lot of bugs. And that's not what you want on your team. So the other thing that, from my own experience, I realized that at some point, I was very bored at work. And early in my career, I started to hate writing code because I was just bored. I hated what we were doing. And it wasn't that what I was working on wasn't too interesting. It's just that I wanted to expand into multiple directions, and where I was working at wasn't interested in doing that. And I realized that people are social beings, and we need to be involved in the community, whether it's a user group, just a group of developers you hang out with, or an open source community. So I got involved in a project a long time ago, and I started small. I was just contributing documentation to RSS Bandit, which is an RSS aggregator. And from there, I gained their trust. I started contributing code. And I got involved in this whole world of open source that I had no idea about for many years as a developer. And it allowed me to work on projects that I normally, in types of software, I normally wouldn't have the ability to work on. So if you're not involved in open source, I highly recommend getting involved in that. So the other thing I want to talk about is this concept of the programmer bill of rights. And this is where you have to stand up and maybe take a little risk in a workplace and demand your programmer bill of rights. This is based on a blog post by a friend of mine, Jeff Atwood, who's probably more well known as Coding Horror, or the founder of Stack Overflow, or co-founder. And he talks about these things: 2 monitors, fast computer, choice of keyboard and mouse, comfortable chair, fast internet. I hear that's a problem in New Zealand. And quiet working conditions so you can get into the flow. Now, when he says 2 monitors, I think the underlying point is the right equipment that's going to help you get your job done. So if it's one 30-inch monitor is better for you, then ask for a 30-inch monitor, right? And it's so funny to me that companies will reject developers who say, I need a more comfortable chair, because they're being, penny wise, pound foolish, right? You sit in a chair longer than you probably sleep in your bed. And when you think about how much you spend on your bed, a chair is worth the investment. If you have to buy it yourself, that's also not a bad idea. I have my own chair so that everywhere I go, I bring it with me, and my butt is comfortable. So I want to talk about the workplace and things that sort of increase the love of coding in the workplace. So I work at GitHub, and our motto is social coding. And one of the things that attracted me to GitHub was it's a model of a lot of these principles I just talked about with autonomy, mastery, and such. And true story, GitHub was founded over some beers. It's a Ruby meetup, and there's Tom Preston Werner was playing around with some code, and he called over this guy, Chris Wanstroth, and said, hey, check this out. And so they started working it on the weekend, and they built up GitHub. And there's some interesting aspects of how GitHub is organized. We're a flat hierarchy. I don't have a manager. We don't have management because we haven't yet found the need for management. If there's any managers in the room, I'm sure that's not a knock on you. But it may well be that someday down the road, as we continue to grow, we will need some. But right now, we don't. And in many ways, the way I look at it is we're organized very similarly to the open source community. The open source community doesn't have a CEO and then a set of lieutenants and so on, right? The open source community is just the overall community is a loose set of people who self-organize and form a team to build a product. And so that's the way we work at GitHub. So I'm on a small team that is building a client for Windows for GitHub. But there's other teams that are doing other interesting things. And if I was interested, I could join them and help them out for a time being as well. We're distributed. There's an article that just came out that talked about the distributed nature of GitHub on, I think it's GigaOM. And he gave a stat that 60% of GitHub employees work remotely. So this is not a sense of remote like, oh, we're second-class citizens, because I work remote. But our company is built around around being remote and about being async. GitHub's bootstrap. So what that means is that it's never taken funding. It's been able to be profitable from the beginning, and thus have what the Silicon Valley calls infinite runway. So the runway is if I take funding and I'm burning through cash at a certain rate, at some point I run out of the funding and I need to go beg for more funding. Versus if you're profitable, you have infinite runway. So the way GitHub works, we have this concept of optimizing for happiness, because we believe that happy employees are more productive employees. And the research backs this up. And so some of the things that we do is meetings are waste. At Microsoft, I spent maybe half my week in meetings, if not more than that. And that was one of the things that really got to me. And I really love this concept that meetings are waste, so let's not have them. So at GitHub, we generally don't have meetings. We really rely on async communication. So here I am in New Zealand for a week, and when I get back, I can read through their campfire logs and whatnot, and I'll be able to get caught up. It's not like that. The fact that I'm gone means that I'm being left behind. So we really focus on async communication. Even among people who are in the office, we try to keep things in our campfire chat room. We don't have set work hours, and this is a big one. When you're a creative person, your bursts of creativity, your bursts of coding prowess don't always happen 9 to 5. They might happen at 2 a.m. They might happen at 6 a.m. Your schedule may be different from your coworkers. So this idea of having set work hours sort of tries to confine us all to be the same, but we're creative, like I said, we're a creative endeavor. And you really want to be able to work when you're most effective and not work when you're not being effective. So in the middle of the day, if I'm just not able to lay down some code, I'll just stop. I'll stop working. I'll say, I'll get to it later. The other thing is automation. We automate all the things. And this is, I showed you Hubot earlier, and that's a big part of it. But we want to make sure that we don't manually deploy code. We don't manually do all these rote things that sort of chip away. They're like little frictions. They chip away at your enjoyment of work when you have to do things that are just rote. And our vacation policy is take vacation when you need it. Now, I'm speaking to people in New Zealand who, from what I hear, you have about 4 or 5 weeks a year anyway. So this might not mean as much to you as it does to Americans, where the typical job only gives you 2 weeks of vacation. But this idea of tracking your vacation days in general just kind of sucks. And so we're like, well, what we want to do is hire people who are responsible, who care about the company, care about the work they do, and that we can trust to make right decisions for the company. So if you need to take a 3-week vacation, go ahead and take your 3-week vacation. And when I talk to people about this, and when people hear about these rules, they think, oh, this can't possibly work. This will never work. And you're right. This won't work for everybody. This won't work for McDonald's, but, for line chefs at McDonald's. But some of these principles may work at your company. So, I'm not saying that you need to follow what GitHub's doing, but these are the concepts that GitHub's doing that might increase, some of these things might be good things to incorporate in your workplace and increase your enjoyment of writing code. So I'll talk about the industry. What are things that get us excited about writing code in the industry? And one of the things is new ideas. New ideas are exciting. They move the industry forward. And when I think about this, I'm talking about how our industry tends to be segregated into different technology groups, right? So for example, I used to consider myself a .NET developer. So I mostly focused on .NET. I went to .NET user groups. And I dabbled in Ruby a little bit. I write JavaScript occasionally. But I was a .NET developer. And I go talk to these .NET developers, and every .NET developer I knew only went to .NET user groups. But now I'm doing GitHub, and I'm working with Ruby developers, Objective-C developers, even guys who write Erlang. And you realize that, wow, not only are there really cool stuff happening in these other communities that I had no idea about, but there's actually cool stuff that's happening in the .NET community that they didn't know about. And so we start sharing ideas. Things like from the .NET world, people are really interested in LINQ, which is Language Integrated Query, or they're interested in reactive extensions. So we have one of our coworkers who is trying to take reactive extensions, which is this really, really cool, mind-blowing, very hard to wrap your head around technology. for dealing with async in a really clean, nice, declarative way. And he's trying to port it to Cocoa and Objective-C. And I really love this sharing of ideas, this sharing of communities, and realizing that we're not only a part of an individual software community, but we're a part of an overall software community. And that the more we share these ideas, the more we lift the entire community up. And so I encourage you to attend a user group for a technology or a language that you're not familiar with, and learn about these other languages. You might find a new idea that really improves the language that you're currently working in. So yeah, I just spoke to this point on accident, but yeah. So the term that I like to hear is polyglot, right? A polyglot developer is one who dabbles in a lot of different languages and kind of spreads themselves out rather than going for specialization. Because what's that quote? Specializations for insects. So there's another thing I want to talk about, which is respect within our community, within our industry. I was reading this blog post from a woman who calls herself the Real Katie. And she was talking about all these little jabs that her male coworkers would do throughout the day, speaking to her like a child, not valuing her ideas, taking credit for her ideas. And it really kind of broke my heart to think about that, even in this day and age, that people face this in our industry. This is a picture of me, and I have these two kids. It's my son and my daughter. And, someday I hope that they're going to write code, because, I think writing code is the best goddamn profession around. And the thing is that I'm not necessarily going to push them to be developers, but I want them to at least have exposure and be literate in programming. But I was thinking, if my daughter becomes a programmer, the last thing I want her to have to deal with is this lack of respect for women in our industry, or the lack of respect for minorities. Now, I'm not blaming anyone here. I think you all are great people. But in fact, I'm not trying to assign blame, in fact. What I want to talk about is, regardless of the reasons, let's look at the reality and what's objectively happening in our industry. If you look around, you can see that this audience, for example, is predominantly male. And in fact, the stats are that, like in this example, for women majoring in computer science, it's declined significantly. There might have been a recent upturn, but it's from 37 to 20%. And you have to ask yourself, okay, regardless of the reasons why, is this a good thing, or is this a bad thing? Here's another stat. So, and this one was really shocking to me, that only 1.5% of open source developers involved in open source, are women. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, that is such a small number. And I was talking to a woman I know who's a developer. She has a fairly well-known blog. And I asked her, why aren't you involved in open source? I've been trying to invite you to work on some of my projects. And she told me that she's kind of intimidated because there's a lot of these bombastic personalities in there who are not very welcoming to people. And it's not necessarily a male-female thing, but it's just a thing of like being welcoming to your projects. And the reason why I think this is a problem is there's a lot of research that shows that with every successive level of increased diversity, companies do better. So we can always talk about the moral arguments, like it's just the right thing to do, but there's also a business reason. And the business reason is that your company will do better when you have a diverse workforce. Our industry will do better when we have a diverse workforce. I wrote a blog post about this recently, and I mentioned that we all know that there's a lot of good developers, but there's a lot of bad developers out there. And what we need to do is get more people interested in our profession. So we have this perception. I was talking to people, and we have this perception that we're all these antisocial kind of cave dwellers. And we just like to isolate ourselves in a cave, write code, and then come up for air once in a while. But I actually think that's so far from the truth. But we just haven't yet communicated that to people. That developers are actually very social people. I mean, when you look at open source communities, the amount of promiscuous sharing of code that we do, it's downright dirty. So I wanted to, when I talk to a lot of men about this, or when I look at the comments of people who wrote on my blog post, a lot of men don't understand like this idea that like why would women feel intimidated in workflows? I've never experienced any of this. I've never seen it happen. And I try to think of something that would sort of highlight sort of the intimidation factor. And I was thinking, what if you went to work and every day you were faced with this? I don't know about you, but I would be pretty intimidated. That would affect my ability to get good work done. So I hear these guys are pretty popular here. So in conclusion, what I want to talk about is I love to code, and I think you all love to code. And what I'd love to do is make coding something that remove all the obstacles to that love. Remove all that obstacles individually, get people involved in community and open source. Remove it in the workplace, get rid of things that really detract from the love that we have for coding, and elevate our industry up so that we get a more diversity within our industry. So back to the secondary title. So if you want to double your productivity in one easy step, work somewhere that makes you happy and fucking love to code. Thank you.